Okay, so we will start this roundtable. This is 1 hour roundtable, and the title of this roundtable is DeFi and DAO governance. So yesterday we had another session with WTSC and Codec on the decentralized governance. It's a very broad one, but today so we have the from financial point of view. Anyway, so we will discuss about DeFi and DAO governance, and we have four panelists, and I am moderating this session, but we have another the four panelists: McCorry, Ivan Glava, Glava, okay, and Frane Šesnić, and Caroline Glava. And we have four panelists. And at the beginning of this panel, so I would like to ask each panelist to make a brief self-introduction, followed by that, what are you doing in the DeFi or DAO or the blockchain sphere? Okay, first, so Ivan, could you maybe a quick introduction of what they're doing now?
Okay, thank you very much. So my background is from financial markets. I used to work as a broker and on the stock exchange, and have some experience working with the central depository agency as well, also with the fund management business. And from 2015, I'm following the currency development. So the first DeFi projects happened during that time, like 2015, 2016 was the start of the DeFi. From my perspective, and the full boom has happened in 2019 or 20. I was following all the projects, testing them, working on some of the projects and everything. And also it connects with the DAO governance, because all the DeFi projects kind of publish their tokens that are used as governance tokens to govern the development of DeFi projects. And I'm still in this market today. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, next, Frane.
Hello, good morning. So my name is Frane Šesnić, and I'm CEO of the Zagreb Innovation Center. We are the biggest startup and innovation hub in Croatia and in the region. And my background is I'm a computer scientist, but also I graduated from Zagreb from the financial institutions, and I have a deep interest in alternative currencies, and also I was of assembly of the biggest cooperative in Croatia for ethical financing, and we wanted to establish an ethical bank in Croatia based on new technology. And I'm here today to share one vision that would like to establish a community token within our hub. We have about 500 members, and we would like to boost the communication and interaction among our members through the community token, and I will talk about the idea.
Thank you, and Patrick.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm Patrick. I did my PhD in cryptocurrencies from 2013 to 2016, starting on Bitcoin and later on to Ethereum. I was a full-time academic until about 2019 when I decided to quit the university and try to do a startup. There was two of us in the dog, and then we got acquired by Shira. And I recently left Shira and I joined the Arbitrum Foundation, where I administer the DAO for Arbitrum. That's a part of my experience, I guess.
Okay, thank you very much. And Caroline?
Thanks, Shimashira. It's great to be here. So I run the public policy team at Chainalysis, and I've been doing that for about 18 months. And before I joined Chainalysis, I spent about 4 years or so setting up and running the Global Blockchain Policy Center at the OECD. So my interest in the world of DeFi and DAO governance is really to kind of bridge the gap between policymakers and regulators and industry, help them understand, what exactly DeFi and DAOs are, particularly as this kind of question of, or this desire to bring DeFi within the regulatory perimeter increases, thinking about what that means in practice, what are the different models that are being built that might meet those policy objectives, and what all of that will mean from the industry perspective. I will confess, I'm having a little trouble hearing you. So if I don't quite catch a question, please forgive me.
Thank you very much. And I have any specific objectives for this, but so I'm thinking that the world of governance is very broad for the DeFi, and so this is the DAO space. But I have the 3 viewpoints of the governance here. One is technology governance. Engineers, grassroots engineers created many tons of the software for the DAO and DeFi. But the governance of technology governance should be important, because there are many bugs or vulnerability happen in the DeFi world. And how we govern or how we create that health ecosystem from technology point of view. The second viewpoint is organization. Yesterday, so we had a discussion that the decentralized governance. But my question is, so we are organizing some DAO today. But my question is, how is it sustainable? Make it sustainable? That's very fine. But so the most of DAO might not be alive in 100 years after now. For example, the sustainability of the DAO is my question. But anyway, the second viewpoint is the organization and operation point of view. The third point is the regulation. So regulators have some level of concern about the organization. So how the regulatory compliance the DAO is. So we have the 3 different viewpoints regarding the governance of the DAO and DeFi. I want to start with the technology point of view. And then I think public is the best person to think about that or talk about that. So what are the most important points to think about technology governance for DeFi?
There's lots of different ways to tackle that question.
Yeah.
At a high level, if you look at the open source movement, for example, so you open source your code, you put it in GitHub, and anyone can contribute towards the code. Anyone can then take the code and then go and instantiate it. And there you don't necessarily need DAO governance, because everyone has their own. If I want to run the code, I take it myself and I run it. If you look at something like Arbitrum, the live network with $8 billion locked into it is one instantiation of that code. And so what the DAO really governs is, one is, of course, the repo itself, the code repo, and ultimately the live instance of this network. And it's up to the DAO to make sure that going into the long term, that any software operates that instance is approved, and of course, bug-free, etc., and protect all the users. So that's why you need the DAO for something like Arbitrum, or like any system that's live and holds a substantial amount of funds. It's really to protect it and make sure all operators are kosher, I guess.
Of course, you are the expert the technology, and you are the expert in cybersecurity, cryptography, and you are good to that we know software codes to confirm that the entire ecosystem is secure enough. But it's not easy for the general people who use that DAO system or DeFi system. What is a good way for the general people? Or so the people without any so high level technology literacy, so how they confirm that?
think the first one is that a lot of these DAO systems, if you're an average stakeholder, you can delegate your coins to someone else, and then they can do the hard work and then do it for you. So even in the Arbitrum network, a lot of the delegates who have substantial voting power, they're all very technically minded. You know, they're very much talking about future technical topics like MEV, for example, should we embrace it or should we try to restrict it? They're very much, discussing that vision right now. So that's one way to deal with it. You know, if you're not technical, you delegate it to someone that you trust or someone whose viewpoint that you think is interesting. Maybe very similar to politics in that sense. The other one is that the DAO, so when you get a new software upgrade, it's up to the DAO that votes for it and ultimately approve it. And then, of course, it can be pushed on the area that actually be run. And that's where the foundation script comes in now. You can consider it a foundation for the companies, and the DAO is the brain. So Arbitrum is the raise service level agreements with auditors. You can then keep the code, audit it, and of course provide the audits to the DAO, alongside actual information of how this upgrade may impact the Arbitrum network. So it's up to us how to provide that, a good level of information, so then they can make a, I do judgment on how to go on. So I guess there's two ways to look at that.
Okay, that I understand, and my interpretation of that what Patrick said is okay. So we can trust some experts, a group of experts for that technology used in DAO. But my interpretation is we need this enough number of experts inside that DAO ecosystem. For example, so all the DAOs implement something, design something like that. But this is some kind of assumption. But if we have enough number of the qualified experts, it works for a long time. So this is my interpretation.
Well, it also depends on the type of DAO as well. So in our case, it's very technical. So you want your delegates to also be technical. But maybe other DAO is much more, let's say, like a legal DAO, for example, where they're working with policy makers. And you want your delegates to be legally minded. So really comes out to the community and kind of expertise and required. And that's important. It's not just about us coders. Too many more important people out there.
Okay, so I would like to ask a similar kind of question to the both of you, because that so if we need that enough number of qualified experts to organize DAO, that the role of the company organize DAO or so local community like us, yes, so you are the innovation center or something like that. The role of that kind of the private company also innovate that consortium something or local community is very important to have that to increase the number of experts inside DAO. But so what is the role of the private company or that kind of community to make that DAO or to make DAO or DeFi governance healthy and sustainable?
Well, from my perspective, their role is to attract new users of this example cryptocurrencies. Onboarding people in this sector is not easy. The lack of incentive, from my perspective, is one of the reasons, because most of the people are chasing just incentives, whether it's that in money or in the reputation or any other form. So basically, what Frane is doing is one big step forward towards this integration of other businesses, normal people, builders, and everyone to try to create DAO from the real world, not only from the code, because most of the DAOs right now are just old users from cryptocurrency world, and onboarding new users is, from my perspective, another big step that is going to happen in the next few years. As long as we have examples like this one, what Frane is trying to do, and other examples happening in the world, there are going to be people who are going to I mentioned be amazed by the technology and the concept of the DAO, DeFi, and everything. But the lack of incentive for them is, from my perspective, another issue that is going to be really hard to solve. Everything now in this, from my perspective, right now the incentives are mostly based around the money or around earning something from the DAO, and most of them are just instant earnings. You know, everyone's chasing for instant earnings. There's no long-term like a long-term commitment to the DAO to earn like your reputation and, for example, to earn money as well, but in the long run. And these are some of the problems from my perspective that are tackling the DAO and DeFi space right now.
Okay, do you mean that current incentive mechanism by giving some token or selling or buying a token is not enough for the long-term sustainability?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, but it's the same question.
Thank you. I think that technology is always ahead of the regulatory frame. So that gap between the regulatory starts to frame some technology is a good position to, in that period before the regulatory frame is good position to start a new initiatives and to test technology on some real life solutions. For some technology, maybe it's not too late because we already started to over-regulate some technologies, and thus we started this incentive in our community to boost the communication among our tenants. So we started with the coffee. So we started to motivate the communication and integration among our tenants to that everybody can become a partner. So he can send a push-up message to our system, and he can notice all members that he will now open the bar, and anyone who wants to have a coffee with him and to do some talk with him can start it, and benefit for the main benefit is communication, but also we are using the alternative currency to build let's say closed economy within the system, and only the members can share it. But also we have some issues, you know, how to start, how to make it simple for someone that hasn't used any cryptocurrency so far, and maybe it will be their first wallet, and these are the issues that we are dealing with.
And I'm going to ask you your question very quickly. So you're working with the Croatian blockchain community, and my question there. So the government of Croatia is the government is supportive for the DeFi and DAO or to promote. For example, in Japanese government is not promoting DAO, for example, but so what is the current trend in?
I think that the current situation that the Croatian government isn't even aware of DAO, and maybe that also.
But so the relation could be that good or bad things for the activity of the grassroots development of DAO.
But no matter what the Croatian government does, we are under the EU legal system, so we need to adapt completely to the EU. So we are following the EU regulatory for everything.
Do you have some concern about the recent European, so EU or something like that?
I'm not so deep into it, but maybe.
Well, the situation here is pretty primitive around the development of the cryptocurrency business, and within that DAOs, DeFi's, and everything. We have the representatives here from Croatian national banks, which are on the part of the government regulation body. All other statements are affirmative as well, but I have to agree here with Frane. I think it's all about theory. You know, no one has experience in how it really works, how it feels to be in this business by just say that actively voting the DAO or using the DeFi products. I think they have no experience in that. So that is a opportunity for us who are inside of the business to build it. But for other users, you know, because government is just supported because of the EU, and MiCA is just forming the regulation in and out of the crypto. But all the development inside the crypto business, like DAOs, DeFi, and NFTs, whatever you want, is just a free playground where everyone can code or build whatever they want.
Okay, and Caroline, thanks for waiting. I'd like to jump in that viewpoint that from the regulation point of view.
Yeah, so I think Šesnić, I mean,
so you go ahead.
can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good. No, I think a couple of things have been picked up. The sort of the user experience issue, which is still, let's say, in progress. There is the incentive issue, how to actually build something long-term and build engagement long-term. And then there's this third piece, which is the regulatory piece. And I think it's particularly relevant when you're dealing with a DAO, which is involved in financial assets. And I think there's still questions around what exactly a financial asset is and how that differs from some of the other assets that might be represented by a particular token. But, you know, part of that issue is engagement, I think, with regulators, helping them understand the nature of DeFi and DAOs. Although I do think in some countries perhaps, that level of knowledge of the space has increased a lot over the last 12 to 18 months or so. And it is an ongoing effort, but I think, in fact, probably one of the more significant areas of focus that needs to happen now is that for those people wishing to build DeFi services that will gain acceptance by a broader range of people, including institutional players, looking at models that will allow to access, say, the efficiencies of smart contracts, but also be able to meet regulatory obligations. And of course, the first one off the bat is to do with, AML. Is really probably where a lot more attention needs to be focused from an industry perspective at this stage. We've had some fairly clear statements now in the last 3 or 4 weeks, both from the US Treasury, also from France, the ACPR there, to really set out that in their perspective, and talking here specifically about Treasury, that in their perspective, some of the rules relating to AML under the Bank Secrecy Act, for example, already in fact apply to DeFi. And that's really quite a change to what we've seen up until now under, say, the rules set by the FATF, which has sort of carved out DeFi to a large extent and sort of said, we'll come back and look at that issue at some future point. And I think we're very much at that future point now. And I'm not sure that there's an awareness of how much the debate has changed from a regulatory perspective in the last sort of couple of months in that regard.
Okay, I have a question. So for platform, for KYC, think that virtual service provider bus or simple transition money by using Bitcoin or so easy to run. So imagine that what happened. But for DeFi or also it could be that some other means for to do that. So transmit to the money of the battle, right? But so I think that so thinking about the AML KYC for DAO or DeFi is more complicated than the simple cryptocurrency or crypto asset. But so could you, so if possible, could you let us know that what happened in the DAO or DeFi space from the AML KYC point of view?
Yeah, I think it's, so this question of what is a VASP and how I guess you extend it into the DeFi space is one where I don't know that anyone has very precise answers, but I think that if the industry wants to be part of shaping what I think of, you know, in the world, the standard makers and the standard takers. So if the industry wants to be part of the standard makers, then they really need to play a very active role in thinking about what this concept of a virtual asset service provider means when you bring it into the DeFi space. We are past at this point a discussion that says, well, I'm decentralized, these rules just don't apply. It's just, this argument no longer flies. And so given we're at this sort of next stage, wanting to define what are the potential touch points, in a sense, in the DeFi space is very much where the discussions act. And to think that the conversation won't go forward or that the regulation won't apply, I think is probably not particularly realistic, and therefore you can either be part of the conversation and part of framing that and be the part of the standard makers, or you can be a standard taker and just receive what the regulators set out. And I think that future where they set that out is approaching very, very quickly. You know, and I think there's different potential points that could be identified as part of the virtual asset service provider definition, and the FATF has talked a little bit about that in their writing in 2021, to do with, you know, having sufficient control. And there's different aspects you can look at. You can look at front ends, you can look at the DAOs themselves, and so on and so forth. But really kind of trying to explore that in more detail, I think is, and for the industry to think more closely about what that might mean and what makes most sense from a technical perspective as well, is where they can probably add the most value and really be the most effective in terms of shaping the outcomes of the rules.
Yeah. Just like to add a comment or situation that happened maybe in the last year or two. I don't remember now the timeline, the full timeline. Well, the OPAC made a regulation that all the transactions mean native cash, which is mixer that provides you anonymity in transactions, are not applicable by this law, and the whole network just stopped providing these transactions, settlement to these transactions. It kind of, I think it went to 98% of the validators in the network that they just stopped settling these transactions. But then the incentive came out in the form of MEV, which is like more money for the people who provide transactions, no matter are they compliant or not. And when they open sourced this project, what happened is that the OPAC compliant validators fell from, I think, 80%. They were the most. I think they're now below 30. Do you know that?
Yeah. And I think it's important.
So all of the regulations are not pliable in these networks, because the incentives are the ones where the users go, not the regulations. So it's going to be a very interesting time to see what's going to happen when MiCA goes in, because MiCA just, as I said, they regulate the in and out of the crypto world. But other restrictions that are trying to be imposed in the developing currency world, because DAOs, DeFi's, whatever you like, I don't think it's going to pass that easy.
Yeah, I think this is an important clarification there. So there was one entity called Flossbox that were censoring the OPAC tornado cost transactions. but no tornado cash transaction was censored from the network. So they always got confirmed, but it was just delayed.
Yeah,
The best way to think about it is that 98% of the validators are censoring or ignoring their transaction. And it'll take 2 out of every 100 blocks or 1 out of 50 blocks to eventually get confirmed.
yeah.
And that's pretty cool.
You can stop that,
I
right?
can stop that, yeah. It may take a bit longer, but it'll still get in.
You can build whatever regulation do you want, but you can't stop innovation happening.
Yeah.
Just because someone, policymakers, the policymakers trying to stop something from this innovation, I think it's going to pass. That's just my perspective. And practice shows that that's happening. They tried that, they failed there. What is going to happen in the future? But I think it's going to be very interesting to follow this sector.
Okay, I think that for the fast forward critical exchange of custody. So now that what that fast should do is very clear after the years of effort among stakeholders. But for the DeFi space, that what DeFi provider should do still not clear at this moment.
Yeah, and then they're trying to impose the KYC element in there as well. From my perspective, this whole thing around KYC, AML, terrorist financing and everything, it's just nonsense, because most of the people are suffering from these regulations. Because why is someone trying to limit your transaction to 1,000, 2,000 euros, and everything about that you need to disclose your history about where did you get that money? I mean, everyone has to be a financial expert. Everyone needs to know how to use Microsoft Excel or any other tool to analyze your transaction history and give them proofs about something that where did your money came from. I think these regulations are just, they're overhyping, and my view is that in the next few years it's just gonna burst like something not applicable to the real life. It's impossible to give all the information KYC and policies are trying to get. It's just impossible in the real sector to have this. And especially trying to push that in DeFi.
Yeah.
Goodbye to you.
So I can add some color to that as well. Not color, but maybe comments sort of. So I guess there's 2 cases. One was in the Senate, I think, and then actually the Chainalysis CEO was there. I think he's called Jonathan something. I don't know, maybe probably you can get his name. But he was being questioned about the ability for terrorists or bad actors to launder money via DeFi. And he basically said there's not enough liquidity on the network to do like a couple $1 million. That they physically can't, money, they can't launder their money without being called or treated as a source. And that's brilliant. It was a publicly verifiable, fully auditable, transparent, real-time network. If you're doing bad stuff, people like Chainalysis will find you and they'll support you. So why could all these bottlenecks and barriers to users when you're going to get, when the bot actors will get discovered eventually?
Yeah, I remember in 2015 when I was just entering this space, there was Dog from Winkle's brothers were in the session, and then the panelist asked them, okay, what do you think about laundering money in the cryptocurrency world and everything? Jim just looked at him and said, okay, only stupid people who use cryptocurrency to launder the money to finance terrorism or abuse someone with this, because everything is traceable one way or another. You're going to get if you do something like that, someone will find you. People like Chainalysis or any other analytic companies, they're going to find you, and eventually you need to cash out this money. It's going to be traced, marked. It's a no-go story. The DeFi, the currency world has some stigma about being the laundered money and everything, but from my perspective, this is the story is completely on the opposite side. It's all basically clear money. Everyone, when you're trying to enter the cryptocurrency world with your fiat money, you have so many questions. Getting where did you get this money? Where are you gonna send it? From that point, everyone can track your money. All the companies can track all of your movements from this with this money, and it's just a big mess happening with these regulations. Everything is so clear when you get inside of the crypto companies. Everything is so clear, but outside of that, everything is just a mess.
I think that's a fair point to make, and I think even Treasury has acknowledged that in their latest paper. They're still more concerned about illicit activities in traditional finance and in cash than they are in the crypto space. So I do think that's a fair point, and I think the criticisms of the effectiveness of existing KYC. Certainly, have evidence. I do think that notwithstanding those things, the idea that those regulations are not coming to this space, and I certainly take the point. You can, let's say you do something on the front end, but you can still access the smart contract directly. Absolutely true. It is going to be somewhat limiting in terms of levels of adoption in reality. A lot of people, and maybe technology, maybe there'll be smart, like ChatGPT that, is able to design things that just goes direct to the smart contract. Maybe there's going to be technical workarounds as part of that user experience. But I think as things probably sit today, it is going to be somewhat limiting to expect the ecosystem to be able to grow if those things aren't addressed beyond a certain point.
I agree. Maybe this is for the regulatory point. I was thinking of the Coinbase is a shining example of this. I think what's important for compliance is either they give defined rules, so organization can't be compliant, or they can clear rules so they can be fought in court as well. Right now in the US, you can clearly see they're not giving rules, because if they do, they're going to get fought in court. And so they just leave us as victims because we can't act. We don't know how to follow the rules, but not us, but the industry as a whole don't know how to follow the rules. We don't comply the rules. So it's not fair playing field, it's to be helping us support the industry.
So I can share some personal experience recently as a CEO of a company. I'm under the magnifier of the system. So I need to explain every transaction on my bank account. So now I'm explaining why my wife has owed me 1,000 euros. So it's really frustrating for me as a user. Definitely, I'm not sure that we are going in the right direction with this old regulatory system.
Okay, and I wonder that, that for the complicated DAO or DeFi space, that is more complicated than the good asset that's paying. I hope that it's my misunderstanding, but so even regulators do not know that what they would like to do or what is the requirement from regulation point of view.
Yeah, but that is completely normal, because this is just the world that is started to develop. It's not something that we have for like 50, 20, 30 years in the system, and then okay, we see the flaws, we see the good things, let's regulate this kind of business. No, what is happening right now is that technology is evolving, developing, building, and innovating, but the regulation are trying to act already in this business, and my perspective is that that's happening only because of the money, Yeah. They're trying to trace the money, like like money is traced right now. Visas, MasterCards, they have all your transactions in the on the monetary systems, but what is trying to develop in these DAOs and DeFi world is just the possibility, I'm sorry, I can't get the word, the liquidity is trying to get more, to give more space to liquidity so that the transactions can flow seamlessly without getting these surveillance tools around all the transactions that are happening in the system. Eventually, there are going to be surveillance from my perspective, but right now, the implications happening with these regulations are just flowing down this path.
Yeah, if that request by regulators are clear, so from the perspective, so if that request is very clear, so we can start some project inside BGIN to create some technology, some operational document or standard to comply with that request by regulators. But I think that the request by regulators is still unclear. So because that's how you say that the technology advanced.
Yeah.
To that discussion inside the regulators. So if so I think that we need to have some opportunity for engineers to educate regulators or something like that. What do you think? So the technology advances, so the people who create the technology should educate the regulator part. And if that regulator and the engineers have a common understanding for the technology, we can start some collaborative work. What do you think?
Can I start? I would like to refer on the China example. I think regulatory and the government, the only goal for them, the other role is control and to measure the use of anything. So we can see that in China, it's not possible to pay without Alipay or WeChat Pay. So there are only solutions. There are almost cashless country. But from behind, somebody is controlling all transactions and measuring what's happening. And I think that's the idea for all governments and all regulators. So how we will find and tackle that, I'm not sure.
And regarding the question, what my perspective is that it's already happening. So many engineers are trying to talk with regulators, but I think they talk different language. It's very hard to understand one and other side, and the translators between them are missing. Maybe even we are all in the same path, but we don't understand each other. Maybe that's my perspective, because as we heard here from Croatian regulatory representatives, when you listen to them, I think we are on the same path, but we're not talking the same language, That's just my perspective, but maybe somewhere there are some bad guys for trying to follow everything and trying and pointing fingers to other people and say, oh, he did this, he paid that, he did this, he paid that. Maybe, but I don't believe in that kind of world. I believe that we are all on the same path, that the lack of communication is the problem, and the lack of understanding is the problem. We do talk with the regulators, people from industry, more and more with the regulators, but the understanding is something that is missing here, and to understand what we builders are doing, the only way they can understand is just if they onboard and use this application and build, like for example, and after that, I think they can have much more understanding, because experience is something what they lack of, and also from our side, understanding the whole complex system of regulations and rules, it's also a big mess. Yeah.
Okay. There's a participant who Japanese Territorial Agency here. He's in the house setting. So he's an engineer. He's organizing code for Japan. This is something like DAO. But he's now currently part-time government officer at the Japanese Territorial Agency. And he has some experience or some opinion that how the engineer can educate government officials. So could you provide some of your experience or your opinion that?
Thank you for introducing me. Yeah, it's difficult. I understand. So the engineers and the regulators have different language actually. Yeah. And I also I started my I started entering the government field more than 10 years ago. So I needed, or I think I needed 5 years to learn what the viewpoints from the government side. So we need.
And sorry, just give me the microphone. And you're the guy from the inside, right? You're inside for 5 years.
Yeah.
And then you understand them, right? Imagine how it is for the people who are not inside of the system, but outside of the system, but need to be compliant with all their regulations. I mean, I'm sorry, pardon my French, but it's impossible to do that.
Yeah, but Glava can provide such kind of fields. People can discuss on the ground at the same table. So I think we need a good project to experiment to understand the new technologies for the government people. So we sometimes organize hackathon event, or just a brainstorming event, and I think how and solve the real problem, not our side.
Yeah, okay, maybe I agree, but because we don't need new projects, right? We have so many projects right now. People are working in institutions that they don't understand what is Microsoft Excel, right? And I think this is the core problem. They don't use they don't use it. They can use it, especially when we talk about Web3 applications or dealing with your keys in cryptocurrency business. It's a really complex thing. Yeah, they don't understand it, but they regulate it. We need to be compliant. The lack of projects is something that I think it's not a problem. The projects are already there, visible. Anyone can join. You can try them, test them, and say, okay, this terminated cache is for laundering money. No, it is not. It's just for your privacy, because eventually you as a user have all of the you have all of the proofs about all of your transactions. You can prove everything. You can always prove that you didn't launder the money. If they accuse you, you can prove that you're not the launderer. But the concept on the outside is that this is the laundering machine, you know. And no one is testing these applications and then building the rules. The rules will just get built because of the imagination, how it works. No one understands how it works. Really?
Yeah. So
the applications are clear.
Layers different.
Yeah. Lack of communication, lack of understanding. This is the problem.
But one thing only quickly, I think that's why the Japanese government has to launch new agency, digital agency. That is the point. And invite many outsiders to the government.
Yeah, not Japanese government, I think every government.
Okay, Caroline, and I think that you have a lot of communication with regulators, many.
Yeah.
And I think that Chainalysis has so many successful cases to have a communication with regulators or to make some common understanding that to have common languages. So could you let us know that some example of the successful case?
I'm sorry, can I add just one question for Caroline? Do you have any, how to say, do you have any analysis that tells you how much volume is made daily around the cryptocurrency business, like in exchanges or on-chain data and everything? And how much of those, what is the percentage of funding transactions or money laundering transactions, or something like that, right? So basically, how big is the volume, and what is the percentage of laundered money or any form of transaction that are applicable by the law? Do you have any form of analysis?
Yeah, we do. We publish the data that we have. I mean, it's extremely low in terms of the proportion of activity. You're sitting about, in the last 12 months, you're sitting at about 0.25%, which is illicit activity. So it's extremely small. Two important caveats always is that one, that refers to on-chain illicit activity. So for example, if I'm selling drugs on the street and then I want to convert that fiat money into crypto to transfer it, then the illicitness of that money is not being caught. But in terms of things like darknet marketplaces, ransomware attacks, hacks on cross-chain bridges, so on and so terrorist financing, and so on and so forth, that is done through crypto, then we're able to follow the data. The other piece, sort of caveat, is that it's point in time. So we continue to update those numbers. So as we learn more information sort of historically about, oh, well, in fact, that transaction was illicit, then we update that number. So that number does shift a bit over time, but not significant. We certainly don't get anywhere near even the 1% mark when it shifts. So it's a very, very small proportion. And there is absolutely a question about proportionality, the burden of AML obligations versus the wrong that you're trying to protect against. And that's true in traditional finance as it is in our space as well. And I think maybe too, also to your point about the utility of people actually being able to, policymakers, regulators being able to use the tools. I mean, the reality is in some countries, they're not allowed to they're not allowed to hold digital assets. So they're not able to experiment in those ways. So you do actually have to go along and do demonstrations, and that's what we spend a lot of time doing, is just go and do demonstrations of how things work, including on the transparency point, which is obviously very much core to what we do, just showing how much you can see and how much more transparency you have in this space than you have in traditional finance, for example. But so yeah, it's, I think, getting very hands-on, but being able to do it in a way that regulators are allowed to interact is important. And I'll make the point again, though, that in terms of thinking about what models of DeFi look like that achieve those policy objectives, not necessarily in the same way. And I do take the point about the effectiveness of existing AML systems, but being able to achieve the policy objective, because I don't think anybody in our ecosystem wants a ecosystem where very significant proportions, and this is true when we looked at the Tornado Cash sanctions, very significant proportion of those activities were laundering funds for North Korea. And I don't think anybody in this ecosystem wants to see that continue to be the case. People don't want to be in liquidity pools with people pulling darknet market money from child sex abuse material. Like, that's just not something which I think anybody in hopefully in this room wants. And so what are the tools to achieve those policy objectives without the same heaviness of compliance that we see in traditional finance?
Okay, and we have about 5 minutes for the Q&A. So, the part, yes, next.
Thank you, Shitra. So my question is for the entire panel, although I particularly wanted to reference Caroline's remarks about standardization as well. And bearing in mind that in the future bearing in mind the fact that we do get greater transparency with these transactions on distributed ledgers, but notwithstanding the fact that in the future, distributed ledgers won't record assets or tokens, perhaps, and actually will have oblivious self-verifying assets where the ledger is just a obliviously recording transactions. That's the future. Bearing in mind that, can we really think about the FATF style regulations, which are based on standards such as ISO 20022 and the assumption, which basically this standard evolved in a different era when there were assumptions that all electronic transactions were custodian to custodian, and that there were not electronic transactions from user to user or from owner to custodian or owner to owner. But these are now possible. And do we need to have a change, a shift in the way that we think about regulations to recognize that what we are capturing might only be one party to a transaction, and what we might be able to analyze might only be part of this? Is there latitude to build regulations around the expectation that some part of this transaction will be monitored and observable, but not all of it? And is there latitude to build standards towards this expectation that will ultimately enable consumers to have real, true, verifiable privacy that's not privacy by promise? Thank you.
Yeah, so this is jump in there. I think Zcash running something like that. They have a really key, so you can second your transaction content. Who cares about it? So you're already demonstrating that's possible today, and I think long term you'll see more startups do that. So we give practice. So it's also like people want privacy against, and that's really important for financial markets. Everybody does a position, you want to make sure other financial actors not front run you, but you want to hear the regulations. Yeah, that's very going to happen.
Yeah, I agree, and I also think that the markets are going to eat regulations. They're going to outside, they're going to be winners, so that the regulations are going to need to adapt to the markets, not markets adapting to the regulations, because market is like a living beast, and it's not possible when you have incentives, when you're dealing with money, and money can earn even more money, even though if they go past the law, the market is going to do that one way or another. So there's no way that regulations are going to be the ones that are going to stop the market. No way. From my perspective, when we get these technologies, when we get full anonymity with several changes that Jeff said, the regulations are just going to be complied with that. The same thing is happening right now with the DeFi, for example, and the cryptocurrency business. It evolved, and then the regulations came. And now we are afraid of that, but this ecosystem is going to grow, this ecosystem is going to change, and then the regulations are going to change. But they're not going to stop it. They're just going to slow it down. Nothing more. Just my perspective.
Yeah, I don't even really slow it down. I think it's people just go offshore, they can't comply. And it's where everyone involved is bad situation.
Okay, then.
I think I'm building more on this. And in a sense, I think regulations can be important to protect the reputation of the system. A system that will be, is disruptive, that will be attacked by the incumbent. So we need to be very confident in a sense. And this idea that everything is trackable probably is kind of Bitcoin centric in a regulated country. And I want just to give you 3 examples, so you may want to elaborate further on. So the first one is when you lose the jurisdiction. So we can control transactions, but the money runs across different countries, and there are some countries in which you can do nothing. The second is, for instance, the creation of value. Think to the NFT, and the first NFT that was sold for 80 million. So this is a very easy way to generate value that appears to be legal and could be a big problem, even for the system. And the third example is the development of, for instance, zero-knowledge processes that allows you to extract computation from the network, do whatever you want, more or less. And that's very difficult to try, I think. So this ideal situation in which everything is safe because it's on the blockchain, and like the challenge it in a good sense.
Do we need to comment there?
Yeah, I was trying to, I don't know what the question was.
Yeah, I didn't hear that.
So the statement was that in a sense, the regulation is something we need for protecting the system. And there are, you comment more on these three examples or others if you want, where it is true that the technology is driving, but we are hoping that the regulation comes forward in a supportive way. These are the three examples in which it's not so white and black and white as we maintain.
I mean, maybe I can jump in there quickly. So like, the way I look at regulation is that it's a way to try to, well, I guess regulate behavior or make sure that, well, maybe another way to put it. Regulation sort of works after the fact. So you know the rules, do something bad, and then they eventually find you, then they punish you for doing that. And it's enforced by humans and obviously the various rejection. What's nice about these cryptocurrency systems is that it's basically like the field of trust engineering. You can define what's trusted, you can measure what's trusted, and your goal is to reduce that trust. So instead of reacting to a bad situation, it allows you to prevent it from ever happening. And so, you know, reduces that trust that you need with other parties. And because it is seamless now to do some of these actions, because it constrains the action space, you can only do things that are allowed. Of course, you get really funny applications around that as well. You know, seamless activation. You know, you can go, I don't know, speculate on JPEGs if you want. People like to speculate on JPEGs. So I feel like it's a tool for regulators because you can actually prevent bad stuff from happening on the digital level, but you still need regulation to do intent of anything that's probably defined on the system.
The problem is that we're trying to over-regulate things, you know, some things should just be left and evolve, you know. And then eventually the regulations and the rules for the game will come, but this time is the way around. That is my comment for this. Marina had a question.
Thank you. Hi. So just 2 days ago, I actually talked to Caroline about this, and she mentioned this before. There is an ACPR call for response for DeFi from France. So the French banking authority, we're working on the response to this. And I think now is the time really to, in a way, be proactive when it comes to DeFi, at least in Europe, and have a say in it. So what do you want to say to the French banking authority when it comes to DeFi? What is important in your mind? And it's a question for everyone, of course.
Maybe Carol, first part.
Actually, I would love to. I would love to hear from you guys. I have to go see the French regulator in a few days, so I'd actually love to hear from industry about your perspective on, what this concept of, like, do you identify with this concept of responsible DeFi? What I'm hearing a lot of is that kind of almost two things. One is that the regulation, like, I hear it's important, but I also hear another strain which says, look, the technology is going to take us further and further away from centralized entities. And can we live with a world where we have part of the picture? On that second point, I think, technology, and I know you guys are going to talk about soul-bound tokens a little bit later today. Like, I think there are different technology solutions which don't look like centralized models, centralized intermediaries. And I think those are quite interesting to flesh out and offer up to regulators as different ways to the same objective. But I think they're still relatively early on. They're very conceptual.
I mean, maybe the thing I would say is what they should do is create not even a friendly regulatory environment. They just create a sandbox environment where startups can work with the regulator, but the regulator doesn't hinder them, they observe them. They just learn how this works and how the software is actually deployed and what they're actually trying to achieve. But they don't say, no, stop doing that. They say, go do it, but we're just going to supervise this to make sure that it's fine. And, and they use that to, define clear rules that people can follow. So sandboxing and not set a terrifying regulatory environment where you want to talk to the regulator. It's very fairly sandbox.
Okay.
I'm sure, unsurprisingly, I have some different views on the regulators and perspectives there. So I'll just offer some thoughts for the group, understanding that most everyone, if not everybody on the panel, disagrees with me. I know, Caroline, we've had that discussion in the past. But first, I'll say on regulation, I actually think that creating regulatory frameworks and guardrails early on, and that are activity-based are much better, because when you go tech-specific, and you wait till after the fact, then you have expensive, like very, very costly changes and adaptations that have to happen with companies to try to adapt to whatever new regulations come in place. Activity-based regulatory frameworks that are not specific to particular technologies won't be playing catch-up, and that's why there were brilliant people at FinCEN. I was not one of those people at FinCEN or paying attention to crypto in 2011, but there were wonderful people there who recognized what was happening in the world of DeFi and that changed our money transmission rule to ensure that it covered value substituting for currency forever there. And that definition it's a great definition, and it will last forever, no matter what form that takes. And I think that's important, because then our risk-based approach, and it's pretty flexible for money services businesses in the US. That's what the expectation is. Innovate with technologies and all of the great potentials that exist here, but make sure that you can meet the risk-based AML expectations. So when there's long existent activity like financial activity, setting those guardrails and regulations early on are critical to, I think, help industry understand what to expect to, and also to give them a goalpost of like, here's where the innovation can be, like around digital identity solutions. On the idea of uneducated regulators, I just disagree with that. I recognize that there certainly are countries that have varying levels of expertise. There's a lot we were even discussing that some developing countries, their regulators are asking for help on how to implement the AML standards and things like the travel rule. But in places like the United States, I think that the regulators, most of the regulators are some of the most brilliant people that I've seen in this space and have been in it for over a decade. So I take issue with some of that. But that's okay. There's also brilliant people on the engineering side and who've been engaging with those regulators and engaging in debates and disagreements for forever. But I would encourage an understanding and an empathy on both sides, and understanding that there's expertise on both sides that can come to the table to help meet the drive responsible innovation here. So I'll also say that on this issue about driving innovation overseas, it's certainly a concern for me. It was when I was at FinCEN, it was when I was at the White House. But I will say that I think it's an assumption that other countries will not be continuing to implement the FATF standards, which includes sanctions regimes related to cryptocurrency. Like right now, jurisdictional arbitrage in the absence of sufficient AML frameworks is the greatest weakness in enabling non-compliance globally. And the few countries that have been regulating for years, Japan, US, South Korea, Canada, Australia, et cetera, they need help. They need the rest of the international community to step up. So it's an assumption that there will not be more enforcement and regulation everywhere on the AML front. On percentage of illicit activity, Caroline, I know Chainalysis always cites your guys' reports. I certainly enjoy reading them. I will highlight, though, that is just the metric that blockchain analytics firms have rulemakings that they receive suspicious activity reports amounting to just under 12% of the crypto market cap. Now that's just suspicious activity. Suspicious does not equal illicit. However, that's also only reporting from US compliant and reporting exchanges. So I will say that The reality is that the number, the number that blockchain analytics firms see is probably a floor, not a ceiling on the amount of illicit activity that's happening. I recognize it's probably between the numbers and stars and blockchain analytics firms, but there's a lot of illicit activity that blockchain analytics firms don't see because it's not evident on chain. And it's evident to other entities, financial institutions, and regulators and law enforcement that have access to that information.
And that is happening in the banks, not in the cryptocurrency.
It's definitely happening in cryptocurrency as well. Absolutely, it totally is. But I understand we're just going to disagree on that issue, and I get it. Also, on assumptions about remaining unobfuscated, of course, I agree the benefits of law enforcement and some testify to the great benefits of public ledgers and supporting investigations, and I agree. I think my greatest concerns in DeFi are over the greater propagation of privacy enhancing technologies that have no built-in mechanisms, because of course you can build an design software to do whatever you want it to do or not to do. They don't have built-in control mechanisms for enabling certain kinds of discoverability or replicability to help victims. It's that future of totally after disintermediated systems where there's no longer a reliance on and off ramps, which is part of the vision of some people in DeFi. And these layers are now obfuscated, which I do think is the future. Like I think in 20 years, people aren't going to want to publish their transactions on public ledgers. It's that future that I see regulators trying to engage on. How do we shape the technology and the innovation to benefit everybody, and what the right middle ground is there? So I would just encourage to think about what that governance model looks like, what accountability should look like in DeFi, including through self-regulation, or if not self-regulation, then government-imposed regulation, because that would be what they do if the sector doesn't demonstrate that it can self-regulate. I think they can just show it, because if not, governments have their incentives and they will take action accordingly.
That's it. Thank you for the comment.
Okay, and it's time to close. And I think this panel discussion is very productive thing, that we have a really good idea for the future in work and how we work together to have a common understanding. Okay, United States is good, but for the distinction, we need to work hard to have a common understanding, common language to avoid regulatory arbitrage. Anyway, that's thank you for having this productive panel discussion, and thank you for joining today, and have a great day. And we have lunch from now, and